How's it going, everybody? I'm so glad you're here, and today we're going to be talking about Bring Her Back, directed by Danny and Michael Filippo, and starring Sally Hawkins, Sora Wong, Billy Barrett, and Jonah Wren Phillips. Following the death of their father, a brother and sister are introduced to their new sibling by their foster mother, only to learn that she has a terrifying secret. The filmmaking journey for Daniel and Michael Filippo has been nothing short of inspiring to watch. For those of you that don't know, they started out as YouTube duo Raka Raka, which was known for such classics as Ronald McDonald Meets Dr. Phil and Ronald McDonald Extreme Mukbang. They were known as basically anything but horror filmmakers up until they shocked audiences worldwide with their excellent debut film Talk to Me out of Sundance that wound up getting distributed by A24. And so now their sophomore feature, Bring Her Back, seeks to dial pretty much everything up to 11. And in many ways it does. This film is excellent. It's brutal, it's bloody, it's suspenseful, it's gnarly, it's terrifying, and it actually joins the ranks of the amount of horror films I can count on one hand that made me shed a tear. I think that this film is shockingly moving, more importantly than anything else. This film employs a very similar opening act structure to what Talk to Me did, in the sense that it kind of starts off a bit concerningly traditional. The Filippo brothers are very well aware of the fact that the stories they're telling and the characters they're showing you and the body horror elements that they may or may not be showing you later aren't necessarily things we haven't seen a million times before. We're well aware of the bare bones of what these style of films are going to be. So they kind of ask you to bear with going through the motions in the first 20 minutes and dealing with some exposition or some sloppy character development or just very basic trajectory through lines so that you can really get to the meat and potatoes of the story and they can start showing you what they really want to show you. And with this film, it still does fall into some of those same trappings. The first 20 minutes feel extremely rushed compared to the rest of the movie. There's some character development that's sort of glossed over, purposely glossed over, but it still kind of feels unintentionally confusing at times. There's certain scenes that don't really have as much weight as they should because they are moved past from so quickly. And again, there's reasons for these things that are revealed a little bit farther down the line, but it's still presented a tad sloppily. But what I think separates this film from Talk to Me and what ultimately elevates it above Talk to Me, I do think that this film is better, is that this film has such a stark increase in confidence and direction, because there's a scene about 45 minutes into this movie that is so fucking gnarly and so cool and beautifully directed and presented that basically any concern that you had up until that point that this film might not be going in the direction you want it to, or that it's following too similar to the expectations you may have, you can just throw those out the window. Forget everything that you thought you were gonna predict. It doesn't go in that direction. And it also recontextualizes a few things in the first half hour or so that may have been interpreted as meandering. And with Talk to Me, that film still kind of employs some more traditional aspects throughout the runtime to try and make sure that you're still willing to go along with it in some of its ballsier aspects, especially the dreadful ending that film has. And I don't mean dreadful in a derogatory way, I mean it in a great way. It makes you feel dreadful. There's still some things in that movie that they just kind of offer you as things you've seen a million times to sort of ask you to keep moving along when they didn't need to do that. And with Bring Her Back, they don't do that at all. They say, okay, we got it over with. Here's what the rest of the film is, take it or leave it. Something else with this film that they proved that wasn't just a one-off is the Filippo brothers have such a distinct visual eye for just the casual close-up. There's so many in this film. There's very few mediums in this film and even fewer wides. And when they're used, they're gorgeous, but this film really heavily utilizes close-ups. And what I find interesting is that claustrophobia doesn't really seem like the primary goal. Usually with close-ups in horror films, the easy trajectory to go is just, oh, claustrophobia. We need to do a close-up, so it's claustrophobic. But this film isn't really claustrophobic. There's a much deeper and seedier and tragic and almost even more harmful intent behind it all that I thought worked beautifully. It's very hard to describe, and there's also a few distinct visual motifs introduced early on with the character of Piper in this film, and I can see why some people would be concerned at the amount of close-ups that a film like this would have, because an over-reliance on a certain type of shot can kind of scream inexperience or insecurity, but every single shot feels timed to the frame. They know exactly the kind of vision that they're shooting for, they know where the camera needs to move, they know when the camera needs to stop moving, everything moves with such intent and purpose and rhythm that unless you're searching for a certain style of camera movement, you really won't notice it. but you'll feel it, and that's what's most important. And after sitting with the film for a couple days, I really wanted to make sure that I was feeling this before I said it, but I do feel comfortable now saying that I think that this is Sally Hawkins' best performance by a wide margin. The work she does in this film is truly unparalleled. She is utterly exceptional. Looking back on her introduction to the film now, so many subtle characterization choices, not only in the writing, but in just her facial expressions and the gestures she makes, is genuinely jaw-dropping. She does beautiful work here. Some could argue that she makes the film. I wouldn't argue that necessarily because there's plenty of other things in this film worth watching besides her, but the work she does in this film is extraordinary. And the biggest reason for that, I think, is her character is not necessarily unlike many other pathetic female horror antagonists that we've seen throughout the years, but the empathy and the understanding that you feel for her character, that you also don't regret feeling for her character, also cannot go unrecognized. She does some truly horrible things in this film, and she does have some really dark secrets, as the plot summary promises you, but every time there's a new reveal, you understand that she's the villain, but there's also just this deep-seated sadness and sympathy that you feel for her character. And the film asks you to feel a lot for such an unredeemable person, and without question you do. Sally Hawkins delivers a few lines in this movie with such heart-wrenching intensity, they'll never leave my mind. There's a few deliveries and few lines, especially into the third act, that were just heart-wrenching in the best possible way. And it all culminates in one of my favorite final shots of the year, in addition to one of my favorite visual motifs of the year. And Sally Hawkins is just a force to be reckoned with in this film. And all of this praise that I'm throwing at her should not undermine anybody else's performance in the movie at all. Everybody turns in fantastic work. There's a couple line deliveries every now and again from some of the child actors that don't work as well as they probably anticipated they would, but that's just to be expected with such inexperienced child actors. And for being inexperienced child actors, they turn in wonderful performances, all three of them. As the film transitions into its third act, it sort of asks you as the audience to suspend disbelief on a few things that may feel contrived or a little too far-fetched. And if it were any other movie, it would probably bother me more. But because of how suspenseful and intense and gut-wrenching I found the rest of the film and just how well executed everything was, I was willing to completely overlook it. But the film, you can tell in those tiny little moments, still feels concerned that the audience isn't really willing to meet them where they're at. So the certain scenes will halt to kind of over-explain something and explain why it's possible or why it's happened or why a character is doing the things they're doing, when you really didn't need that. If you think about it for more than a few minutes, you can come up with it in your head. And yeah, it might seem far-fetched, but this is a demonic, satanic ritual horror film. Most things in it are already far-fetched. Especially when so much of the other exposition scenes in this film are so brilliantly interwoven into conversations or just casual set pieces. There's a scene with Sally Hawkins and the young man in this film where they're speaking to each other behind two chairs in a kitchen after having a night of drinking. And the way that they deliver exposition in this scene is so brilliant. And that's not the only scene like that in this film. And so to see the exposition kind of be delivered a bit more ham-fisted towards the end there was a bit of a disappointment, especially considering how confident the rest of the film is, but it's such a mild gripe. There's a couple of moments in the third act that genuinely made my jaw drop. So in my mind, it's overlooked. Horror films about grief these days are a dime a dozen, but what I find most important is that the Phillipo brothers know that, and their intent behind this film is very clear. And they do a brilliant job at working with genre. They do a brilliant job of working with character actors. The practical effects in this movie are insane. It looks gorgeous. The secret weapon to any horror film is its sound design, and there are a few effects that will never be leaving my mind. Everything that this film sets out to do, it does so beautifully in a tight pace. Regardless of any minor undeniable issues the film may have, it exceeds its goals with flying colors. I thought this film was excellent, and I really hope that you guys go out and support it this weekend because it's not getting as much attention as I was anticipating it would. I'm gonna be giving Bring Her Back an 8 out of 10. If you've seen the film, let me know what you think of it down below in the comment section. Thank you guys so much as always for watching this video. Like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.